If you haven't heard by now, things in the LCS might get a little bit hairy starting this Sunday as players via the LCS Players Association are looking to vote to potentially strike and walk out from the LCS, which starts literally next week. Seems like there's always something going on with striking the last week and a half, and for those that don't know, the Writers Guild is currently striking to get better rates as streaming becomes more relevant and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's actually going on right here. The difference, they're an actual union. The LCS Players Association is merely a collective that asks Riot things on behalf of players. Players don't really have any formal legal power here. Hence why the ask is if half of the players in the LCS can agree to the walkout, then they can do it. But the LCS Players Association can't bar its members from competing like some unions can. It gets really complicated. But the point being, they need 50% of the members to agree. And even then, a player can agree and still technically go in and play if they decide after that vote that it's, in their best interest to probably still go and play without needing to call another vote. So let's talk about this because there's a lot to go on here, and I really think people are overhyping a little bit how much power the players actually have and how much they can actually lose here is being underspoken.
Okay, so let's start where all of this began. Whenever franchising came to be in 2018, LCS teams were required to field academy teams as a way to develop talent. Teams would basically bring on younger players, try them out, see how they went, and then possibly sign them up to their main roster, obviously on a lesser salary because they're coming straight from academy to pro. They would probably play on that salary for a year or two and then sign a veteran deal. The problem was many teams ultimately just didn't care about it. Why? Because barring a few top teams, only 5 to 10 players would get promoted to the LCS per year as more and more imports came in. So there was less value on fielding these teams, which we now know cost LCS teams about $500,000 to $1 million in range. And if they're not promoting anybody, that's just a cost that they're eating each and every single year. So teams wanted it gone. But from the player side, players were stuck in contract jail. They were promising rookies like Tenacity, who just unfortunately got caught when they wanted to stick with an org like 100 Thieves, but 100 Thieves wouldn't promote him because Someday was having an MVP level split, and then the split that they finally do promote him, it's complicated. But nevertheless, when it came to the player side of things, it's not like they were seeing all that much opportunity. Players would be stuck in academy hell like copy for a long period of time, so really nobody was happy with this system. At the end of the day, teams were paying a lot of money and not promoting anybody nor selling anybody with enough money to be able to recoup the cost that they were putting in. Players were stuck in this system forever, and Riot unfortunately had to eat the brunt of the negativity on this as well because they were the ones that implemented the system that required teams to have these academy teams as well. So 2 weeks ago, give or take now, Riot decided to drop the requirements for teams to have academy teams, which meant that 7 out of 10 teams pulled out, leaving 35 players without a job, and obviously coaching staff and supporting people beyond that were unfortunately just hung out to dry and had absolutely nothing to show for it. And there were players with visa issues that got dropped and had to eat. I mean, we still don't know to this moment. Are they going back to their home countries? Are they finding ways to stay here? We have no clue. So the LCS Players Association was pissed, and for the first time really spoke out heavily against Riot. The problem, though, they don't really have any power. You see, the issue is that the LCS Players Association is literally just a players association. It's a collective that tries to argue on behalf of LCS players in an attempt to get them what they want, or, protect them against Riot, or in this case, protect them against the teams. But the problem is they're not a formal union. They have no power. They have no leverage. They have nothing to really help them negotiate along the way. Players can ask them to do things, but ultimately they don't have any power. So that's why, as of today, the LCS is asking its players to try and do a strike or a walkout, basically stop playing in an attempt to force Riot's hand. The thought process is that when players don't play, it costs Riot money. Riot's going to want to negotiate and agree to their terms. But the problem is that's not how it actually works. You see, the difference between this and the screenwriters' problem, or their strike, is the fact that media and entertainment companies need writers. They need shows in order to operate. That's literally their entire business. They put on a show, they sell advertising on that show, and they're needed. For the LCS, Riot doesn't technically need us. We're basically an extended marketing arm for them, in addition to some small standalone, semi-profitable on an international side, but not profitable on a domestic side, sports conglomerate thing. But ultimately, Riot doesn't need us to be able to function. So we're not really in a position of power. Now, the one thing you can say is that Riot does make a lot of their skin sales and generate a lot of marketing revenue and attention from esports, and there's no denying that. But the problem is that the LCS players going on strike. There's, what, 3 other leagues that people could ultimately tune into? So are they really losing all that much? But let's be fair. Let's actually look at what the Players Association is asking from Riot. What are they trying to achieve in this standoff with Riot and with teams? And is it possible? Well, this is their bullet list. And the first one, we're immediately going to start off with a no. There is no chance in any way, shape, or form that we get the Valorant model of promotion or relegation into the LCS. Why? Because all 10 teams currently have ownership stake in the LCS and split revenue because of that. So if you're introducing more people to that pool, you're splitting an already low amount of revenue, which is entirely reliant upon advertising, which is already going down in the market as is. You're splitting that up even more ways if you introduce more teams to that pool. On top of that, any teams that are trying to sell or get out because of their financial problems or whatever it might be, nevertheless, they're looking to get out of the LCS. Having a direct path into the LCS, besides the money that you bought in for, tanks their market value. Their spot goes from, say, being worth $20 million to made up number $6 million overnight, like that. And all of these companies are going to be pissed. So the negotiating thing that the LCS Players Association would have to try and argue or leverage is that should Riot basically reimburse payments for the franchise spots that they've already received. So say a franchise has paid $10 million in value and assume those payments, and their spot's now worth $6 million, do they get $4 million back? But that's not going to happen. Riot's not going to give them $4 million. So there's no way. That's not happening. So option 1, out of the table. Everything else, $300,000 guaranteed salary for all academy teams. You can argue whether that's fair, whether it's too high, whether it's too low, irrelevant. Technically, like that's a fair arguing point, and not something that Riot is really going to be like a dick about. Like there's nothing really holding their hand against it. So they could do it, but they don't have to. On top of that, the LCS players winning Summer Split, getting a guaranteed minimum salary the next year, the 3/5 spots, all this stuff. Like everything past bullet point 1, Riot technically could do, but the point ultimately remains, they don't have to. And that's where strikes ultimately come into their problems. And by all means, they're good things. And don't take this video as me saying that strikes aren't a good thing and aren't useful. They are. Personally, I would love to see the players strike once they've agreed to having a union and have terms for a collective bargaining agreement that they can come to a table with the LCS, with the teams and the players, and everybody hash their stuff out. I made a list here of things that would have to happen in that scenario in order to try and hash out some sort of 3-way deal or collective bargaining agreement between the 3. And even this is like a very small list compared to what actually needs to happen, including Riot pushing for additional revenue streams for teams, which I've somewhat talked about already. But it's just not, it's not going to happen. Like the reality is the LCS players are going to go on strike if they approve this vote, which we'll get into in a minute whether it's actually going to happen or not. They're going to hold out from playing. Teams are then going to say, okay, well, you're not playing, you're not performing, we're not going to pay you because you have a contracted obligation to perform in these games. If you were the designated starter, you're not doing that, therefore you're not getting paid. So players are already going to get weary because of that. On top of that, Riot's just going to sit there and be like, no. And there's nothing anybody else can do about it. That's the problem. Like there's no power, there's no leverage, there's nothing here on the player side. They can walk out and it can sound great from an altruistic point of view, but there's just too many other avenues here for Riot to just look at them and be like, nah, we're going to hold out. We're going to keep playing your game. We're not going to host the LCS. We're going to save the $50,000 of cost eat the advertising revenue that we're probably going to lose from this, but ultimately you're going to give out first because you need your salary more than we need you. Because yeah, we might take a small marketing hit, we might do all this, but you know what? We're in a position of power, and that is what it is. You can't do anything about that. We can hold out. See how long these players, average age 18 to 21, can hold off when their contracts and their money starts swelling up. I doubt many of them have saved for a moment like this and prepared for it. To reiterate, I think it's a good thing. I really do wish that the players would actually unionize and strike in a way that's actually beneficial for them and gives them a little bit more leverage. Not that they would get much more even with unionizing, but it's at least a little bit more than they have right now. I just don't see a world where it happens. And the honest answer is when the players go for this vote on Sunday night, we're truly gonna find out how many of them actually care about the NACL. You saw a lot of people come out on Twitter and say, yeah, you know, they're really screwing this up. Like, I came from the system. Well, guess what? You're not in that system anymore now. So the question is, do you care enough to actually withhold your own paycheck for them? Do you actually have a vested interest in that system beyond your own money that you're getting right now? And I think the honest answer is going to be no. And a combination of that and the intimidation from Riot and from everybody else is going to come in as they try and strike and try and cost other people money. It's going to be tough. Like, put yourself in their shoes for a minute here. You're making, say, $200,000. And Riot's sitting here saying, we will pull the plug on you. And teams are saying, we will pull the plug on you. If you do this for an extended period of time, we will hold you out. That's not easy. We're living a real life Suits example, and it's going to be interesting to follow. There's a lot of wishful thinking that's done in esports as people want the best in every scenario, but the real world unfortunately doesn't work like that. As unfortunate as it might be, you would hope that everybody would act in the best interest of each other. Players would take a salary cut, for example, to minimize the amount of cost that they're inflicting, say, and implement a system where the amount of salary that can be given out for a team as they're recruiting players is equal to X% of total revenue for North American esports. You would want that to be a scenario, but again, we're not in a position where players have been willing to do that, and they've proven that historically. Maybe now that their salaries have dropped, sure, we'll see. But I don't know. We'll find out. This is going to be really, really interesting to follow. And if I had to guess, if I had to put a number on it, I would say of the 26 votes needed for this to pass and for a walkout to actually start, I'd say they'll get 15. I think 15 is the actual amount of number that you'll get. And nothing's going to change. Players probably won't unionize, and we'll continue down this exact same path with Riot and the teams deciding almost everything and trying to figure it out. Not that to a certain extent that's a bad thing, but you don't want there to be a power imbalance, which there currently is. And there's no way to start guaranteeing that or protecting that without a union. Only time will tell. Anyways, let me know your thoughts. Obviously, there are counterpoints to this. There's opposition to the argument that I'm probably not fully getting because I see this from my point of view and from one side only. So let me know yours. What do you think actually can come out of this? What do you think will happen as a result of this? Do you have more faith in the players than I do? More importantly, if you want to continue this discussion and see the videos that'll come out of this as time goes on, be sure to drop a follow or subscribe. We're on YouTube. Jesus Christ, I need to remember that. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to follow. I love legal stuff like this, even if it is kind of scary for the scene as a whole. From an outsider, luckily we don't have to worry about that pressure. From the inside, I do not envy anybody involved with this situation because this could get very ugly very quickly.